remember, like Bob Clark and
Rob Clark and Joe Bordelli.
Watch the debate. I'm so tired of people saying, oh, did you watch the debate? You know what you could debate, dude? You could debate these nuts. Ha! Got 'em.
In the heart of Dallas, where legends unfold, a tale of shadows, mysteries untold, where truth is obscured in the depths of the night. The Lone Gunman Podcast sheds a flickering light.
Section 107 of the Fair Use Act of 1976 provides protection to use copyrighted material for research, analysis, education, and commentary purposes. We here at Loose Moose Productions reserve that right. Now, on with the show. Here's Joe B and the Triple B. Hey, Aunt Udine, how's things in Texas?
Everything is going to hell down here in Texas.
Hands on Triple B and Joe B and the Triple B, baby. Triple B and Joe B. Rock on, get Joe ready. Triple B and Joe B and Triple B, baby. Triple B and Joe B. Rock on, get Joe ready. And here we go.
And here we go.
That's right, everybody. What's up, and welcome to episode number 310 of the Lone Gunman Podcast. I am to Triple B, Big Bad Bobby in the house, along with the bearded clam himself, Mountain Man, Joe Borelli. How are you, sir?
Hey, bud. How are you? Happy Friday. How was your week been?
How was my what?
Week been.
Oh, I thought you said weekend. It's been a long week, for sure. And I'm glad to be here with you and everybody else that loves to come here and hang out with us on a Friday night, Joe.
Yes, sir.
So I'm not even going to ask you because I don't want to hear the word Mets come out of your mouth.
OMG.
We already know how Joe's doing, everybody. He's on top of the world, Ma. Top of the world.
Yes.
But let's welcome in some folks, shall we, Joe?
Let's do it.
We got Big Trey in the house. Shreveport Trey. What's up, buddy? Spirit is hanging. Wow. Already, before we even get started, we got to thank John. What's up, John? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And Jack.
Thank
J
you,
and J. Thank you, Jack. Much appreciated, my friend.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jack.
Absolutely. See No Evil is in the house. James Smith, the man with the plain name, is in the house. Tiny Dancer, of course.
Tiny.
Makes Joseph smile. Jack Taylor. Oh, we already said we already thanked Jack.
Yeah.
Zendar. Hello, Zendar. What's up, buddy? The Umbrella Man is in the house. There's our Rocket Queen. Colleen. Scott. Hello, Scott. Scott is in the house. Bungled's in. Garden and Guns is in. South to West is in. Claude and Udine's in. Sally is here. She's in from across the pond. And Paul is in. Well, welcome, everybody. We love hanging out with you. We got a great show for you. And we thought we'd kick it off with something that happened relatively recently, and that is the 60th anniversary of the Warren Report. That big, gigantic, heaping, steaming pile of crap that they want to feed to us as some sort of be-all, end-all of the investigation into the death of the president. Now, we all have our personal opinions about the Warren Report and the accompanying 26 volumes. Oh, Thank you, Paula. Thank you.
On her way to the
Bye.
Texas theater.
That's awesome.
That is.
Don't take any gun. So, Joe, without further ado, I mean, we came across something that was kind of an interesting article. So let's get into it because, like I said, it's been 60 years since the Warren Report came out. Of course, 10 months after the assassination, roughly, and give or take a couple weeks here or there. But regardless of your opinion of it, it's one of those things that it's out there. It's pointed at as being, this is the open and shut hard truth of the case. But anybody that's actually read the Warren Report and the 26 volumes knows that it's very full of a lot of things that don't need to be there. It is missing a lot of things that do need to be there. And we can sit here and we can criticize the Warren Report all night long. But, just for the sake of brevity, like I said, we came across this article. Joe's going to get into it with you and tell you a little bit more about the 60th anniversary of the Warren Report and maybe some things we could think about it. So, Joe, without further ado, my friend, kick it.
Sure, let's do it. And and it's pretty easy in our space to criticize the Warren Commission, right, Rob?
Yeah,
we
do it weekly.
Right. But, we figured instead of just doing the same old, we read a very short article from a lady by the name of Miss Scobie. And she was...
No relation to Dick.
She
the
was
astronaut.
She was a lawyer on the Warren Commission, and the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, which was appointed by President Johnson on November 30th, 1963, consisted of 7 persons: Chief Justice of the United States, Earl Warren. The senators were Richard B. Russell of Georgia, John Sherman Cooper of Kentucky. The representatives were Hale Boggs of Louisiana, Gerald Ford of Michigan. All 4 were lawyers there. Members from, I guess, not government, they say private life: Allen W. Dulles, of course, John J. McCloy, a former Assistant Secretary of War, a former President of the World Bank, and
representing the deep state.
Yeah, right. One of many, right? And of course, you have J. Lee Rankin, the former Solicitor General, who served as General Counsel to the Commission. And so this article was released in January 1965. So if you go to the Warren Commission, of course, like John F. Kennedy was killed on November 22nd, 1963. The Warren Commission didn't come out. I think we're like 1 or a week and a half behind the release of it. Sometime in late September, it would be 1964. And in January 1965, this lady who had worked on the Warren Commission wrote a very interesting article from a straight lawyer's perspective on how a possible trial of Lee Harvey Oswald would have looked had he not, of course, been assassinated by Jack Ruby on the 24th. Alfreda Scobie, sorry. And guys, pay attention to this because I'll probably screw up a word or two. She uses a lot of good vocabulary, as a good lawyer does, but she brings up some very interesting points. And keep in mind, she is writing this from the lone nut perspective, in a sense. So she is assuming Oswald did it, but the legal points she brings up are very interesting. So at least 3, and if our sound is a little off, either me or Rob or high, if I'm high or low, or if Rob is high or low, just let us know in the comments. At least 3 marginal comments are relevant to the published report of the Warren Commission. In the first place, it accomplished its original purpose by assembling and evaluating all ascertainable facts relating to the assassination of President Kennedy. It has, to a large extent, laid the ghost of rumor both here and abroad. Second, it has made readily available as to a single murder a mass of evidentiary material of greater magnitude than ever before, which will prove to be a happy hunting ground for law students for years to come. Third, it has lent form, depth, and historical perspective to the event in a way that catches some of the larger implications of our national society and its executive officer, whoever he may be. This report has historical significance. Historical consciousness is a late and significant product of human civilization. Only in the last couple of centuries has there been any real philosophical analysis of specific forms of historical thought and comprehension of historical structure. You can tell she's a lawyer, right, Rob? The nature of man has been a subject of investigation from the days of the Stoic philosophers. Contemporary interpretation is well summed up in the aphorism of Ortega versus Gasset. Man has no nature. What he has is history. Castro maintained that, quote, man is not a rational animal, but a symbolic animal, end quote. That is, the forms of his cultural life cannot be compassed by reason alone, because the forms themselves are symbolic. While a lawyer might regret the philosopher's decision to omit jurisprudence from the 6 symbols which he interprets the evolution of mankind, he cannot quarrel with the inclusion of history as one of the most rewarding. So viewed, the initiation by executive order of the President's Commission on the assassination of President Kennedy was more than the creation of another fact-finding administrative agency, for its value lies both in and beyond the ascertainment of factual truth. History is molded not entirely by events, but by men's judgment of them. The honest, unbiased, factual report of materials, plus the analysis and conclusions drawn by trained and diverse minds, has not only discovered, but in a sense created history in our time. Oof. The commission members themselves, an impressively literate, conscientious, and experienced group of men, drew their staff counsel from representative geographical and professional areas, but it is important to remember that the report was not the result of legal thinking alone. The initial organizational weakness, which might have resulted from the fact that investigators were not given any staff status, doubtless, in quotations, doubtless influenced by an early sensitivity to public opinion in view of rumors that Lee Harvey Oswald might have had prior connections with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was overcome by liaison between the investigative agencies and staff employees. So in fact, finding that the legal interpretation proceeded harmoniously. But this alone could not have produced the document that ultimately emerged, save for the contribution of other than strictly legal viewpoints and the unity, depth, and significance of the Pedium owes much to the decision to treat the work not only as investigative but also historical, and to include on the staff experienced historians whose point of view approaching the issues from a different path offered a symbiotic climate in which the story could be developed. The report is thus the first of its kind to be simultaneously accepted as a scholarly historical presentation, a bestseller, and a work of literature. Interesting. Next paragraph, the evidentiary aspects of the report. This is where it gets really interesting, guys. From a legal standpoint, analysis of the report, and particularly of Chapter 4, stating the case against Oswald, is of special interest because of its evidentiary aspects. It has become widely deplored that Oswald was killed before he could be brought to trial. Our basic emotional and intellectual demands that the concepts of due process and fair trial be observed have led both lawyers and laymen to the conclusion that in the absence of such a trial during the lifetime of the accused, Lee Harvey Oswald, carrying with it the defendant's right to procure and present his own side of the story, something will be lacking in the conclusion reached. So she's saying because he never went to trial, there will always kind of be questions. Had this document set out to be a brief for the prosecution, that would indeed have been true. Since it is not, the fact is inescapable that the report, although crammed with facts that would not be admissible on the trial of a criminal case, sets out the whole picture in a perspective a criminal trial can never achieve. So she's saying, like, the things that are included in the Warren Commission, a lot of it would never be actually admissible in a criminal trial. Collateral to the subject is the emphasis on the prejudice to the right of fair trial and its effects of the admissibility of evidence of the premature divulgence of material by the press and local law enforcement agents at the time of Oswald's first detention, including statements made by Oswald's wife, Marina, as to his ownership of the assassination weapon and other facts. The suspect's refusal to take a polygraph test and results of a thoroughly discredited paraffin test purporting to be proof of the fact that Oswald had recently fired a gun, and the statements of police officers and prosecuting officials that they considered they had an airtight case against him. The report properly concludes that while there was a legitimate area of inquiry within the scope of the public's right to know, neither the press nor the public had the right to be contemporaneously informed by the police or prosecuting authorities of the details of the evidence being accumulated against Oswald. The courtroom, not the newspaper or television screen, is the appropriate forum in our system for the trial of a man accused of a crime. So what evidence would be admissible? Well, apart from this, and from the well-documented conclusion that Oswald was not denied the right to counsel, the interesting question remains as to the characters of the evidence which, from the maze of material set out in the transcript of the commission hearings and in the exhibits, properly could have been adduced against him on trial had he lived to stand trial. There must first be deleted the testimony of his wife, Marina, for although she testified on 3 occasions and was questioned by the press and investigative agencies on scores of other times, it's difficult to find any statement which would not be more hurtful than helpful to her husband. Under Texas law, the wife and Husband and wife may, in all criminal actions, be witnesses for each other, but they shall in no case testify against each other, except in a criminal prosecution for an offense committed by one against the other. So she's saying here that because it's called marital privilege, that is the legal protection which protects spouses from testifying against each other, right? You've seen some of those movies, Rob, where it might have been in The Sopranos too, where it's like, let's get married so I can't testify against you. Like, you know what I mean? And she would...
yeah, Marina would have been totally useless in a criminal trial because they couldn't make her testify against him.
Exactly. And
and you take away a lot of things that she said regarding the pictures, the rifle,
the Walker,
what he was doing, where he was, what he said. Mm-hmm. Throw that all out the window, and what they don't really have much left.
Right. And it would be really interesting because you can, like I was envisioning this week, like say Lee had lived and you have him on the defendant's table and you have someone like Mark Lane, right? Well, I'm not saying him, but someone like him, like defending him, right? And then on the other table, on the prosecution side, you have Raskin, Beelan, Ball, Liebler, right? Like probably like
who the hell's Raskin?
Oh, Rankin. I'm sorry. That's the congressman, Rankin. You know what I mean? You'd have a whole list of prosecutors lined up, right? So it would be stacked definitely against his favor, but without Marina's testimony, it's a lot of things that they that the Warren Commission assumed would not be admissible in a fair trial.
Well, you got to figure too, Joe. Everything that he supposedly said in custody without having a lawyer present probably couldn't be used in a court of law. So you throw that out, you throw Marina's testimony out, you're not really left with a whole lot.
Yeah, you really
would require the Dallas police to actually do police work, which they did not actually like doing.
Yeah, very true. So it's very interesting because, of course, like she's very pro Warren Commission, but she's looking at this from like a straight lawyer angle. And so let me just finish with this here. Considering the transcript and exhibit, I said that. Under Texas law, district criminal transactions are never admissible unless falling within some well-established exception of the general rule. They must tend to connect the defendant with the offense for which he is on trial for as part of a general and composite transaction. It might be argued that the Walker and Kennedy incidents both showed a senseless antagonism against public figures and thus lent credence to otherwise implausible conduct, a sort of extension of the motive exception, which is, however, ordinarily confined to sex crimes. System or modus operandi is another exception, but sharp differences exist between the two crimes. The extended advanced planning and attention given to the escape routes in the Walker affair, the differing ideological images of the victims, which makes Walker's demise more understandable within the framework of Oswald's known thinking than was President Kennedy's. And she's kind of saying it would make sense based on ideology that Oswald would shoot at Walker before he would shoot at Kennedy. In any event, it is perfectly obvious that absent his wife's testimony, the question is academic, as there is no substantial evidence on which an attempt to introduce the prior attempts could be predicated. And that would also include the Nixon allegation as well, right? Which was corroborated by our boy, Rob, James Herbert Martin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Texas law demands that if evidence of the commission or another crime is otherwise admissible, the rule obtains only when proof of the former may be established beyond a reasonable doubt. The remaining evidence the commission found of a probative value consisted of 1, an undated note, which in no way refers to Walker. True. Negative testimony of a Federal Bureau of Investigation expert that the retrieved but damaged bullet cannot be identified as coming from the particular gun, although it could have been, in quotations, fired from the rifle used to kill President Kennedy. And 3, photographs of the Walker premises. Even as to those, the note was turned over to the investigating officers by Marina and could not, in absence of this testimony, be identified with the event, and it is unclear whether the photographs were also delivered by her or were independently found on the premise by officers searching it. The Nixon incident, of course, has no other corroboration. Returning to the assassination itself, it was Marina Oswald who identified the blue jacket found in the depository building as belonging to her husband, the shirt, threads from which were found caught in the rifle, as being one she thought he wore to work on the morning of November 22nd, 63. The white jacket found in the parking lot along Oswald's reconstructed escape route as belonging to him. That is, of course, the Tippit murder they are referring to. The photographs of Oswald with a rifle as being snapshots you took at his request, and a camera found in his effects as the instrument with which they were made. More important, she, Marina, alone identified the rifle as the one as which he owned, and testified that she had seen him practice with it, that it had been moved from New Orleans to Dallas in Ruth Payne's station wagon, and that it had been stored in a green and brown blanket in the Payne's garage. This is the only eyewitness testimony connecting Oswald with the assassination weapon or definitely identifying his clothes. Other descriptions of clothing show the usual contradictions. Marina Oswald also was the only source of a wealth of background information, including facts forming the basis of the interpretation of his character, on which the, quote, motiveless motive. That's an interesting term there, Rob. Motiveless motive. That's kind of like a Thomas Crooks thing, right? Like he would have maybe shot at anyone. I think that's what they're trying to say. The statement that
because they didn't really have a motive. So
right. So
then he's just crazy.
Right. So he would shoot at anyone. Nixon, JFK, Walker. Right. He was just nuts like that. But then you have to ask, why didn't he take credit for it when the TV cameras were in front of his face? If that was his ideology, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just went through all this trouble of doing all this shit and doing the most and actually doing it, he'd be bragging about it, not denying it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because you could pretty much say he was set up so good that they just about caught the dude red-handed. You know, he ain't getting out of it. So at that point, if you did it, you might as well own up to it, you know, and let people know, yeah, I did it, you know, because this, and that. But he denied it till his last breath.
Yeah.
I believe they even had some kind of an agent with him after he was shot in the hospital, you know, asking me, is there anything you want to confess? You know, as he's going in and out of consciousness before he dies. And he didn't.
Yeah. And it also makes you think, like, why did he go back and get the gun? from Beckley if he had planned and was ready to assassinate the president. You'd have your handgun on you. He had an idea. He was set up, which I think is why he went back and got it, if he did do that. And
I was going to say, if he did get it, I mean, it could have been a police throwdown weapon for all we know.
Right. But, I mean, it's an interesting article. I know it's very complicated. I only think I screwed up one word. But the point is, without Marina in a criminal trial, with the evidence being as screwed up as it is, it would be hard to get a conviction without a lot of the things Marina said and corroborated. So, an interesting take on the Warren Commission from a lawyer, because she's saying like a lot of the things in the Warren Commission would never be admitted to a criminal case. Like 26 volumes, get the hell out of here. Like, no way. You would have much less information. And it brings up an interesting point. And it's interesting to kind of like imagine like Lee Harvey Oswald sitting at the defense table with a lawyer like Mark Lane going against, you know, the government's best lawyers, essentially. Without Marina's testimony, what would have happened? And I know they did a mock trial at some point, but.
Well, they even did one like back in the 60s. It's in black and white. And I think it's for the trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. And it wasn't really that much longer after the assassination. And they actually have, you know, like a Lee Harvey Oswald actor in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. And they go through bringing the charges up against him and all that. It's pretty interesting. It's out there on YouTube, you know.
Yeah, I've seen some of it, not all of it, but yeah, bungled hearsay. I mean, it's inadmissible. So things like the Walker attempt, which, you know, Rob. Out of the Blank had a really good episode with Larry Hancock, of course, Robbie, Gary Hill, and Scott Edwards. I might be screwing up his name. Some guy from Dealey Plaza, UK. And they had a great...
Scott Reed.
Scott Reed.
Sorry. Scott Edwards is in our comment section. Hello, Scott.
There we go. And they had a great conversation on the Walker attempt and the letter and things like that, but that definitely wouldn't have been admissible, and as well as the Nixon thing. So then you don't have the prior precedent, right, of he's crazy, he's trying to kill everyone. And just very interesting. I thought that'd be a little change, because anyone can crap on the Warren Commission. That is easy. And but
yeah,
to think about it in a different way is very,
what could have been? What could have been?
I would have loved that trial. That would have been, you think it would have been like the O.J. Simpson trial of like the 60s?
Oh, dude, it would have been a circus maximus.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
It would have been nuts.
Like, it would have been insane. They would have had so much press there. It might have been the first court case to have TV cameras in it, for all we know, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the jury's in a terrible spot too, right? Because they don't want to acquit the potential assassin of the president of the United States, right? Like, imagine them, you know what I mean? Like,
well, good luck finding an unbiased jury of his peers. You know what I'm saying?
Right. In Texas.
God.
Oh, what a mess it would have been. You're right. And it's convenient that he was not ever in trial. So I haven't looked at the comments yet, Rob. I don't know if you saw any good ones, but
I was throwing them up here and there.
Okay.
As we went on through.
I was trying not to follow the reading of that article, because she uses some big words, man. I was like,
you made it through okay. About like the Mets.
4 months.
So, you know, and I hate to keep doing this, but I'm kind of stuck in a rut, folks. And the rut is New Orleans. I cannot get out of the New Orleans rut for some reason. And I know why. It's one of my favorite parts of the case to look into. There's so many colorful characters. There's so many wild stories. And it always comes back to me believing that while the assassination did happen in Dallas, that the plot was hatched and born out of New Orleans. To me, it just had to be. When you look at what Oswald was doing in New Orleans in the summer of '63, to me, that is orchestrated movement, or orchestral maneuvers in the dark, Joe. You know, and to try to figure out and untangle the web of what Oswald was doing, why he was around the people that he was around, and you know, I just think that that's where you're going to come with a breakthrough, you know. So I've kind of been stuck there. And plus I was so excited, you know, of course, to have Janet Banister on the show. And if you haven't watched the episode yet, go back, folks. We had Guy Banister's great niece, Janet Banister, on the show. And we talked about her podcast that she's doing, Family Secrets, Skeletons in the Closet, all about Guy Banister. And we had a fascinating conversation, and you know, which led me down several rabbit holes. And
I love it.
We talked a little bit about Guy Banister's possible involvement with the whole Bonnie and Clyde thing, right, Joe?
Mm-hmm.
So I found this document, and I was like, well, damn, isn't that interesting? So let me pop this bad boy up here. So it's a garrison document, August 17, 1967, concerning Jack Martin, Goldana, Louisiana. Lieutenant Fruge, and of course, he's the dude from, what's her face? Rose Shermy.
Yeah. And Clinton.
Yeah.
Louisiana.
And Clinton. This guy with this, I guess he was a Louisiana state trooper. He got around a lot of the interesting places in this whole assassination lore.
Yeah, very. Yeah.
So Lieutenant Fruge contacted George Franklin, a high school teacher in Goldana, who informed him that the principal of the high school, Mr. Morrison, will be able to give us a lot of information on Jack Martin. Excuse me. Mr. Morrison is out of town and will return on August 26, 1967. He did volunteer, however. Jack Martin's grandfather, Charles Martin, was a member of the Bonnie Parker and Clyde Berry gang, and the gang used to operate and hide out around Goldana, which is between Winfield and Natchitoches, Louisiana. It seems that Charles Martin later on turned state's evidence against the gang and set them up for the sheriff and the FBI, and as a result of this, the entire gang was wiped out. 1 or 2 years later, poor Charles Martin was found cut in half, Joe, on a railroad track around Goldana. Fruge informs me that this area has a notorious reputation for criminals and illegal activities. He said that there were also many small churches and self-appointed ministers in this area. So I found that document and I was like, holy crap. Now, then it dawned on me for a second. Well, Joe, Jack Martin is not his real name. Okay? Not. It's Edward Suggs.
Yeah.
So how could this dude have a grandfather named Charles Martin that was involved with setting up the Bonnie and Clyde gang, and then getting railroad tracked a year or two later?
Yep. That's exactly what I was thinking when you were reading it.
So I dug a little more, Joe.
Okay.
I dug a little more.
I love when you go deep, sir. I love it.
Oh, you ain't the only one. So I went back and I looked some more, And I came across this. Now, if you notice, Joe, at the top, this is a Secret Service document, a Treasury Department document. And I highlighted where it says assassination of president. And I also highlighted where it says Goldana and Natchitoches, Louisiana, 11/22/63. Okay?
Okay.
By Special Agent in Charge John Rice. Now, Joe, we talked about this when we were talking about all the Martins last year, because this was one of them. Jack W. Martin. Okay.
Oh, with the APB.
Yeah. So it says discreet inquiries were made into Goldana and Natchitoches, Louisiana on November 22nd, 63, regarding possible suspect Jack Martin at request of Dallas office. This investigation having been initiated prior. Let me reiterate that. Prior to the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald. And you see where I highlighted it here. Details of the investigation at approximately 2 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963, while at Barksdale Air Force Base in Bossier City, Louisiana. I received a telephone call from a Special Agent Anthony Goretz in New Orleans. He advised that he had just received a phone call from the clerk Lillian Ryan, Dallas, who stated that Special Agent Robert Stewart, I mean, this is like telephone tag, had requested that this office conduct discreet inquiries relative to Jack Martin on Route 1, Goldana, Louisiana, who at the time was considered a possible suspect in the assassination of President Kennedy. No further information was then available to Clerk Ryan. So, as it goes on, John Rice says, I immediately Barksdale goes to Goldana, does a little check, and he goes to the post office and says, hey, where can I find this dude? And they point him in the right direction, which brings us to the second part of this document. For several years, the suspect has been traveling around the country and apparently has been connected with an unidentified religious cult, Joe. It has been rumored, according to Mr. Quarles, that Martin desires to become a preacher. Now, it's awful damn funny, Joe, that we have Jack S. Martin in New Orleans at this time who wanted to become a preacher. He was ordained one of these Orthodox fake wandering bishops, right?
Right.
And this guy, Jack W. Martin, also in Louisiana, is a suspect in the assassination of Kennedy before the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald. How in the hell does that shake out?
Wow. So, Rob likes to surprise me. I haven't seen this before. So, Rob, do you think that this Jack W. Martin could have been Jack S. Martin, a.k.a. Edward Suggs?
No, I don't. But I think it's a case of mistaken identity, Joe.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because why else would the name Jack Martin come up before Oswald is arrested at the Texas Theater? How does that happen that quickly?
A tip. It has to be a tip, right?
Somebody dimed out Jack Martin.
Yeah, and we know what Jack Martin did when he was questioned. He dimed out another person by the name of David
Ferry. Yeah.
So who is this Jack W?
He's just some country bumpkin who travels around the country and connected to an unidentified religious cult. Apparently, he's a loser. But it goes on to say, Robert Richter called this report to my attention how strange it is that neither the commission nor those lawyers sent to New Orleans and Dallas, nor the FBI or the Secret Service had any subsequent interest in, and that the report and the testimony and the printed exhibits totally ignore the immediate interest in one Jack Martin as a, quote, possible suspect in the assassination. Aside from the remarkable similarity in name, how can it be called an investigation when there is no investigation or report of a man suspected before Oswald was arrested? And those are all very good points. And it makes zero sense to me, other than the fact that somebody had dimed out Jack Martin immediately after the assassination for some reason, and they were looking for him. And they came up with this guy first for some reason.
Yeah, and I don't think we have any follow-up on the result of the APB, right? Did they?
Well, we did in the show. We did have some follow-up. He was cleared, ultimately cleared. They questioned him. They found him. They questioned him, and basically said, he had nothing to do with it. But it's interesting that they're looking for Jack Martin before Oswald's even arrested. I mean, that's a gigantic red flag right there.
Yes, sir. It is.
So this Jack W. Martin grandfather, Charles Martin, is involved with the Bonnie and Clyde gang and getting cut in half.
Okay, that makes sense.
His story. That's his story. It's not Suggs' story. It's his story. Interesting.
Very, very. And
so then I came across one of David Ferry's. What?
Did we thank Perpetual Concepts for his $20?
I did silently.
Okay.
But we can do it verbally right now. Thank you, Perpetual Concepts.
Yes.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much, sir. And before you continue, Rob, there's one or two comments I starred. James Smith.
Yeah,
if the
go ahead.
Carpano doesn't fit, you can't convict. Great.
It does not fit under his armpit. We should make a rap song, Joe.
Yeah, it'd probably go viral. Uncle
for all
Dave,
the wrong reasons.
Yeah, right. It would be explicit for sure. So many chain of custody issues that wouldn't survive a decent evidentiary challenge. Yes. And
Dave would know.
Yes, he would. Former police officer, right?
Yes.
And Dean Andrews would probably have won that case. I don't doubt it. Yeah. And
Dino.
Yeah. And of course, our friend Lee, New Orleans is the key. Well, I rhymed it. Thank you, guys. And I'm sorry, Rob.
Yes.
Pray continue, sir.
Pray continuing. All right, moving right along to Leighton Martins. All right. And this is the ex-roommate of Ferry. So, and this is a couple years. Trying to remember what year it was. I want to say it was only a year or two after the assassination, but Leighton Martins, who was figured in, or no, it had to be later than that because they're talking about Garrison's assassination probe.
Probably.
But he was only 25 when he arrested. Leighton Martins was arrested and booked with attempted murder last night following a stabbing in his French Quarter apartment. Police said Martins was accused of stabbing Daryl Gertschlager, 29 years old, Dumaine Street, apartment 401. Gertenschlager was listed in fair condition at Charity Hospital early today after undergoing surgery last night. Before surgery, his condition was reported as extremely critical, Joe. So he was knocking on heaven's door. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
Apparently, police said the stabbing took place in Martins' apartment following an argument. During the argument, officials said Martins went to his kitchen and got an 8-inch butcher knife to protect himself. Police reported that Gertenschlager charged Leighton Martins and was stabbed in the abdomen with the knife. So he literally fell on the blade, Joe, allegedly.
Yeah,
Martin said, I just hold the knife. I didn't stab him. He stabbed himself.
Yeah, that will make a mark as someone who's pretty familiar with Scar.
Right. Martins was a roommate in 1963 of the late David Ferry, who died just a few days after the DA's probe of President John F. Kennedy's murder was revealed. Garrison accused Ferry of being a conspirator in the death of Kennedy. On April 5th, 1967, Martins, who was then a student of University of Southern Louisiana, was indicted by the Orleans Parish Grand Jury for perjury in connection with the testimony he gave about two other Garrison probe figures, Gordon Neville and Sergio Arcacha Smith. He has never been brought to trial on his perjury charges.
Huh.
So I did not know Leighton Martins was an attempted murderer. News to me.
News to me too. And that he was charged at the same like Dean Andrews, right? Wasn't Dean Andrews charged with perjury?
Yeah.
And never went.
I think he charged everybody with perjury who didn't agree with what he was doing because they said it must be lying.
Right.
You know, it just depends on who he took up the charges against.
Yeah. Well, I did not know that either, sir. That is.
Yeah. I'm dropping knowledge here, Joe.
And before you continue, Leighton Martins, because I got the Dean Andrews situation wrong. He was homosexual.
Who?
Leighton Martins.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was
having Diddy parties with David Ferry.
Okay. I just wanted to make that clear to the audience and myself. Yes.
And he was probably banging the dude he stabbed. He probably stabbed him with his knife and something else, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, it could have been.
Guilty as charged, sir.
Yep. All
right. Leighton Martins, damn it. Subject Martins continued to tell us about the subject Butch Marsh, mentioned in the appended documents, who introduced him to Perry Russo, is now employed as a New Orleans police officer. So Leighton Martins basically says that Butch Marsh introduced him to Perry Russo, and this Butch Marsh character is now employed as a New Orleans police officer. He says this man has helped him remember several things, and that he, Marsh, most likely knows a lot himself. Perhaps, he says, Marsh may know more than he cares to admit, or that he will admit. He thinks that insomuch as he, Martins, was away to school so much during that period, Marsh was far more in the know with Ferry than he, Martins, was at the time. Sounds like Martins is trying to say something here without saying it. You know what I'm saying? Martin seems very sincere about and in regard to our latest talks, to the extent that he actually realizes his juvenile naivete at this period in his life. He knows now that both Ferry and Arcacha used, in quotes, him for several reasons. For his youth and for nothing else, Joe. He has mentioned several times about how they, Arcacha and Ferry, seem to decide factors or business policies in secret, and then come to him saying, "We've decided to do this," directing him to then go and implement such and such a procedure, etc., without question. So doing, he has said, I just followed orders, even though I was allegedly supposed to be running things. That is the FRD, etc. Now, that is the student directorate, the Revolutionary something student directorate. Martins also reported to us that the secretary we mentioned to you Tuesday afternoon called him that very evening after our conversation about this matter. He's all worked up over this contact. Leighton Martins. And they're talking about, Joe, one Delphine Roberts right there, sir.
Huh.
Yeah. Now, why would he be all worked up about Delphine, Joe? Well, I'll tell you. And it's something that I did not know. Added to the list of stuff in this episode that I did not know before. So I dug a little further.
How we do it.
The FRD is the Cuban Revolutionary Front, Joe.
Yep.
And the New Orleans delegate for this organization is Sergio Cassius Smith. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, their offices were 544 Camp Street. Okay? And this says 207 Balter Building. This is after they moved out of the Newman Building and into the Balter Building. Okay? But I did not know that Leighton Martins was a big wig in the Fronte Revolucionario Democratico, the FRD, in New Orleans. I believe he was the secretary. Did not know that. Very interesting.
Very.
Very, very interesting.
He was more than just, possibly more than just like a hang around side piece. Like going to Diddy parties, right? I mean, treasurer.
That's right.
Treasure. You said treasurer. That's a significant position. You're controlling a lot of the money and funds.
Yeah, well, secretary, I don't know if he was treasurer.
Oh,
or
secretary.
not.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But still, yeah, still.
So then I wanted to show everybody something I don't think we've actually shown them. We may have discussed it in the past. But this is actually Jack Martin's HSCA interview from 1977. And it's regarding the 531 Lafayette Street, Ferry Oswald Banister. Okay. So on December 5th, 1977, investigators Bob Burris and Lawrence Delsa met Jack S. Martin at his hotel located on St. Charles Avenue. Mr. Martin brought us to the Paradise Bar located at Decatur and Benville Street in New Orleans. Martin stated, and we later confirmed, that William Little Horse Dalzell worked there. Okay? At the Paradise Bar.
Yeah.
The investigators and Jack Martin went to the Holiday Inn located in the 100 block of Royal Street and conducted an interview. Martin stated that he has now been in New Orleans since 55 or 56 and was now separated from his wife, Paula, who worked in the City Hall in New Orleans. Martin stated that now he was a part-time investigator and part-time writer. He had served in World War II in the Air Corps and served in the Pacific, where he did a lot of radio work, including military intelligence work on ships out of Pearl Harbor. He was near Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked. He received an honorable discharge, and he is very anti-communist. He told the investigators about a letter from retired General Claire Chenot, which the investigators later read, praising Jack Martin. District Attorney Herman Coleman and told him about seeing Oswald with Ferry and about the gun. Jack Martin feels that this is the first call anyone made to the New Orleans District Attorney. As a result of that call, Ferry's apartment was raided by special investigators, and Ferry was later arrested and released. Martin felt that the gun Oswald used might have belonged to Ferry, or he might have purchased the rifle from the same place that Ferry bought his. Some of the supplies we dropped in Cuba came from the efforts of William Dalzell, alleged CIA asset operative, who helped Sergio Cassius Smith, FRD, get medical supplies when they were in the Balter building at the 400 block of Camp Street. Jack Martin stated that since he had made his first phone call in 1963, he had been a branded man, Joe. People no longer asked for his help, and his business contacts had went down to zero. He feels that he is being unjustly harassed for trying to be helpful. That's what happens, right?
Yeah.
Try to be the nice guy, you end up getting screwed.
Ain't that the truth? Yeah.
Now let's get into what he says about 11/22/63 here. On the same day of the phone call, 11/22/63, he was drinking at the Cats and Jammer bar with Guy Banister, and they got into an argument. Now, we've heard various recountings of this tale from different perspectives, including different stories from Martin himself, from Delphine, from what Banister told people. This is what Jack Martin says in 1977, folks. This is way after the deal. Way after.
Yeah, almost 15 years.
All right. Yeah. So let's see what he has to say now in 1977. He says he was drinking at the Cats and Jammer bar with Banister, and they got into an argument. They went to Banister's office, and in the heat of the moment, I said, "What are you going to do? Kill me like y'all did Kennedy?" Banister drew his .357 Magnum and beat Martin in the head, which required medical attention, but not serious. When Martin was on the ground, Banister pointed the gun at his head, and he believes Banister would have killed him if not for one of the secretaries, possibly Delphine Roberts, told Banister, "Don't shoot him." A police report was made, and Banister paid all the medical bills, and Martin dropped the charges. Other people in the interest of the select committee are the following. And the first person he says, Joe, he talks about here is Leighton Martins, who is now working at Leonard Crowder's jewelry store. Leighton was a roommate of David Ferry and also wore combat fatigues and possibly trained with the Cubans. Martins was seen at Guy Banister's office many times, and for some time actually worked as an investigator for Guy Banister, Vernon Geddes, and Joseph the Fat Man Newborough.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And we read a statement from Vernon Geddes. I believe it was last episode. Yeah.
Carlos Quiroga is next, Joe. He was an associate of Arcasia and was in 544 Camp Street a lot. Jack Martin gave him the idea of carrying a huge flag down Canal Street in a parade and having people throw dollars in it. The theme was paper bullets at Castro or something to that effect. Quiroga might still be in New Orleans. Guy Johnson's up next. He was an attorney that knew Banister well and was with the Office of Naval Intelligence, which was located in the upstairs of the old post office in the 600 block of Camp Street, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
And we heard Newborough talk about the Office of Naval Intelligence files that Banister was probably keeping for them. Next up, Grady Durham was a lieutenant colonel in the service, possibly Army Reserve, and an attorney that Jack Martin knew well from being around Guy Banister. Durham passed a few bad checks, and people were going to press charges against him. Jack Martin and Joseph Newborough went to the New Orleans coroner, Dr. Nick Chetta, and got warrants issued for mental incompetency.
Whoa.
They took these papers.
Hold on.
Yes. Yes.
You would go to the coroner to get warrants for mental incompetency?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Apparently so.
Maybe before like therapists and psychologists were like a big thing.
Hey, Joe, a doctor is a doctor. You know what I'm saying?
That's true. At least back then.
Yeah. They took these papers to the DA's complaint desk and got the check charges killed as they came in. The Louisiana Bar Association knew about the charges, but Grady Durham is ex-Governor Jimmy Davis's first cousin, so nothing was ever done about it. Now, this next part here is interesting. Federal Bureau of Investigation agent Regis Kennedy, Joe, used to come around and was friendly with the people in Guy Banister's office. Regis Kennedy also spent a lot of time north of Lank Pontchartrain by the Cuban training camps. Jack Martin talked to Kennedy by phone from the apartment of Barbara Reed and had the conversation taped. Jack Martin claims that Regis Kennedy stated that the information about Oswald and the anti-Castro Cubans would be taken care of or straightened out at a later date. Barbara Reed cannot find the tape. Of course she can't,
Shocker.
but does confirm this. Bill Nietzsche was also a former partner of Guy Banister.
Yep, former FBI agent. Yep.
Yep. Nietzsche worked with Banister in the Chicago office, also in Butte, Montana.
Mm-hmm.
Nietzsche and Banister handled the FBI Russian counterintelligence. And also allegedly handled information from Russia over Alaska to Butte, Montana. Nietzsche later went to Michaud and worked as a security guard for Mason Rusk in NASA. A lot of people going to work at this Michaud, Joe.
Well,
NASA,
right? Because
yeah,
wasn't Oswald trying to go there while he was at Riley? And a lot of other people were kind of
Dante Maraschino, a lot of people from Riley Coffee Company. And we'll get into some more here in a little while, but including this guy, but there is more, folks. Martin believes that Michaud also had 3,200 interpreters doing some kind of intelligence work. One of Banister's short-term employees was a man named Earl Stolley, who also did some work for Michaud and in a firm believed to be the Jefferson Highway Company. This company checked out the electronics on the Polaris submarines for the military. Jack Martin identified the following people as intelligence agents with either CIA or DIA at one time or another: William Dalzell, Joseph Newborough, himself. So very, very interesting stuff there. And there is more, I promise, but we'll get there in a little bit. I'm going to hand things back over to Joseph for the next part of the show. I believe, Joe, that it's about time we start talking about David Christ. For Christ's sake, that's the name of the show. Not Christ, Chris. David Christ's sake.
For Christ's sake. I like it.
Yes, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, it's so this guy was a big deal, as we'll get into. And
a swinging dick is what we call him.
Yes. And not one of the people, Rob, that is talked about a lot compared to a lot of agents, right? Like E. Howard Hunt, Dave Atlee Phillips.
Well, he's a very murky character, Joe.
Yeah.
With intelligence ties, and there's just not a lot on these damn people.
Yeah, it's he's a very interesting character, and I've actually a little hint here. Been looking into him a little bit for the upcoming Lancer presentation that me and Douglas Campbell were going to do, but Rob, Douglas Campbell, our friend Doug, backed out on me. So because
no, he didn't.
Yeah, he did. So
no,
he said because I mispronounced his name and I said Douglas Craig last episode, because when you're good friends with people, right? Like you call them like Doug at first, and then like you get good friends with them, and you'd be like Douglas, right? So Douglas Craig is a good old friend of mine, and that's how I got it confused. But Mr. Campbell wasn't that happy. So because the Lancer presentation cannot change the names, I had to pick someone with the same initials. So I asked my friend Douglas Craig to fill in for Doug Campbell, and he said yes.
So you got DC to fill in for DC to talk about DC.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, guys, I am kidding. But yeah, he might factor into our presentation a little bit. I'm not going to tell you how, but this is Mr. David Lamar Christ, and his alias was Daniel L. Carswell. And if you notice, Rob, it's the same initials, DLC, right? And
yes, downloadable content.
Yes, exactly. And hey, this guy is a big deal. So let me go to my.
That's got to be one of the best mug shots I've ever seen.
I don't know where this is from, but
I don't know what it is, but I like it.
yeah.
I mean, it's just he doesn't look like he should be there at all.
Well,
Dude
you
in
know,
a 3-piece suit in a
Yeah.
freaking chair, hair's cut, combed, greased down, looking like you.
mhm.
Sans beard. He's all dolled up. He probably smells great, but it's a mugshot. I love it.
Yeah, and you know, this guy, he's a big deal. So to go back to start, he was born on January 20th, 1918 in Pennsylvania. He passed away in 1985 in Bethesda, Maryland. He joined the Air Force in 1943, where he became a communications officer, cryptology section after training at Yale University. When the war ended, he rejoined Atlas Powder Company, received a bachelor's from Penn State, and then was recruited by the CIA in November 1950 as the first research and development electronics engineer in what has evolved as the Technical Service Division of the CIA. He also created the Applied Physics branch. So, Rob, what you were saying, you know, he didn't like look like a hardcore officer. I mean, he wasn't. He was a kind of a nerd, but he kind of revamped in a time where, you know, technology is moving very quickly. The CIA electronics.
Yeah, he was obviously had to be a very intelligent dude to be doing all this advanced electronical work. You know, things with computers ahead of time, listening devices, bugs, the whole 9 yards. I mean, this guy was probably really slick, really smart.
100%.
Just a smooth operator.
Yes,
in the
sir.
words of Sade.
Yeah, well, we'll get into it, but maybe not a smooth operator because he ended up getting caught. But I ended up searching the education forum for some old information and threads I always kind of check, and I came across a statement by Larry Hancock in 2006 about Christ. And very interesting. And I believe he's in Someone Would Have Talked as well, Larry's book. And little tease here, Rob. We have emailed with Larry, and we hope to have him on in the next couple weeks. We have yet to nail down a time, but Mr. Larry Hancock is going to come on the Lone Gunman podcast in the next couple weeks and talk about his new book, The Oswald Puzzle, which we have alluded to a lot here, Rob, if you've been paying attention, or if everyone has been paying attention.
Yes.
So we are extremely excited for that.
Love Larry. Can't wait to have him on our show for the very first time ever. Ever.
I can't wait. It's a fascinating conversation, and it will be a fascinating conversation. But this is
be all about UFOs.
Hey, we can get into
and
that.
Bigfoot.
I have unacknowledged his book on UFOs, and I haven't finished it. I cracked it, and I get distracted. You know how I am, Rob. But this is from Mr. Larry Hancock. Christ was one of the very first technical staff of the CIA, specialist in electronics, including intercepts, bugs, and wiretapping. He managed to get involved in a Cuban penetration to bug the Chinese embassy in Havana, but their operation went bad, and they ended up trying to steal the code books. Him and his team were captured by Cuban G2 intelligence, but the Cubans had no idea of his real stature or knowledge. They thought he was up to some shady shit, but they didn't know he had ran the CIA's wiretapping and technical services division for almost 4 years at this point. The CIA first tried to use Cuban criminal assets to break his team out of prison, but gave up on that and ended supporting a legal action to get his team out as part of a general move to free Americans in prison. Actually, and we'll get into this shortly, Rob, John Martino met Christ and Christ's team in prison, and they were added to the negotiation as part of an effort to divert attention from Christ and his team. So essentially, Rob, the CIA realized that their head of wiretapping and audio services had been imprisoned by the Cubans, by the communists. This was in September of 1960. And he had knowledge of every wiretapping operation in the past few years.
Yeah, that's an oh shit moment. But like James said, he did a good job keeping his mouth shut.
He did, Rob. And you know what? Shortly, I'm going to read a little document from the CIA, because he was brought up for the Medal of Merit, which was a CIA award in 1970. And they gave a whole kind of summary of his CIA career. And they wouldn't have given that to him if he had not kept his mouth shut, for sure. But you have to, imagine if you have someone with that much knowledge getting captured by the Soviets in Cuba and by relation Russia with that much information. They're bugging out, and they did multiple operations to try to free him. But he was in there from, September 1960 to April 63, almost 2.5 years. And wow. But the whole point was they didn't want to acknowledge exactly, Dave, exactly. He had knowledge of the Mexico City wiretaps. You probably did that. And yeah, I'll get into that shortly. And
yeah, there's your bugger.
Yeah. And hence, I'm going to do a little tease. I'm not going to get into 100% how he factors into Doug and my Lancer presentation, but very interesting. So he was the chief of the Technical Services Division, the Audio Operations Branch. He was witting of the following: all audio operations worldwide since December 1957 to present date. Complete knowledge of all research and development aspects of audio equipment research. Had knowledge of certain Staff D and FI equipment and operations. Complete knowledge of all audio assets in production and stocked for use overseas. Clearance through top secret, special intelligence clearance, and Q clearance. Now, I don't exactly know what Q clearance means, but because it's high in the alphabet, I'm going to assume it's pretty high.
Yeah, I'm going to say that that's probably one of the top clearances you can have.
Yeah, I'm sure it's up there. Worldwide knowledge of the location of all our audio technicians. Having previously been with the Applied Physics branch of the Technical Service Division, he was also aware of many of our other research and development activities. As a branch chief in TSD, he has full information on all personnel in the Technical Services Division and general knowledge of overall activities, including the research programs. He has been to redacted I think it means Cuba many times. I don't know. That's my guess. So he was captured with two other guys breaking in it was a Watergate style break-in at the Chinese Communist News Agency in Havana. Cuban police thought they had caught 3 small fry burglars and locked them up on an island off Cuba. The CIA was desperate to get them back before their cover was blown, aka Cuba didn't know who they had in their custody. One knew the names of numerous CIA contacts in Cuba. The CIA turned to Charles Saragusa, suggesting that he enlist mafia types for a rescue type raid.
Charlie Cigars.
Yeah.
That was his nickname.
Yeah, he's very interesting when you look into a lot of the prisoners that were in Cuba.
And Ravens linebacker Tony Siragusa's uncle.
No. Is it?
Yeah.
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
No, I'm guessing. I don't know.
Hey,
can't be that many Siragusas, and you know what I'm saying?
Hey, there's a lot of paisans named Saragusa. The CIA turned to Charles Saragusa, suggesting that he enlist mafia types. This proved impractical. Instead, Saragusa began dealings with a Chicago lawyer supposedly close to Fidel Castro's brother, Raul. The CIA authorized Saragusa to spend up to $1 million to effect the rescue of the imprisoned agents. The Chicagonian received $10,000 from their CIA funds, but those efforts failed. Eventually, Christ and his 2 other accomplices won their freedom through the legal efforts of a Havana attorney retained by the CIA without Castro's knowledge. So, Christ, Rob, do you want to guess how many kids he had? He was 42 at the time, I think.
A good-looking guy like that? Shit. He probably had, by that age, I'm guessing at least 8.
6. Close.
I was going to say 8 kids with 6 baby mamas.
Not
that he knows about.
But his wife was named Wilma, and she was not happy. She was not happy with his imprisonment, and
I bet not. She
of
missed
course
the ding-a-ling, man.
Yeah, that's right. True. But so they were living in the Washington area, Chris's wife Wilma and their 6 children, and they were frequently visited by members of the agency. Wilma explained to neighbors that her husband is away on a long TDY for the government, which I guess is some operation assignment. Maybe Deep State Tiny can help us out here. TDY.
Today.
Yeah, right. It starts with a T, ends with a Y, kind of like Tiny. So, which has become a permanent assignment. And Wilma Christ had she's been paid her husband's accumulated salary. Operational efforts to secure the release of the men in progress. We have avoided keeping Mrs. Christ fully on the specifics of the efforts being made, as she tends to be critical of the agency and the fact she is unaware of any significant interest in the case in the executive branch of the government. She has previously seen Allen Dulles, General Cabell, and General Maxwell Taylor, and General Carter in regards to her husband.
See, when things like this happen, Joe, and look, back then, we don't even know for sure. I mean, it sounds like it, but we don't even know for sure that Wilma knew that he actually worked for the CIA. You know what I'm saying? Most of them had like cover jobs, like what you
Well,
tell people, like I
I'm
work
not-
for the State Department or something like that.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden you have to explain to Wilma why her husband's not coming home from a business trip, and she's running her mouth, and you got to tell her to shut the fuck up.
Well, Rob,
And they're paying her his salary while he's in jail to help shut her up. But I don't think it was working very well.
So you're right. It wasn't working very well. But so David Christ was so high up in the CIA that he was one of those people that they didn't deny him being an employee of the CIA. Of course, years later, as we'll read his the merit recommendation by the CIA. But she definitely knew because she went to Allen Dulles. She went to Cabell. She was high enough, the wife of a high enough agent, where she knew where to go to complain.
Yeah, I like it.
So, like, why aren't you doing enough to get my husband out of Cuba? And I'm going to get to it in a slide or two here when I bring up my PowerPoint. But they were not keeping her in the loop because she was very upset about this. They did not want her blabbing her mouth to say, my husband is in the CIA and he's in Cuba, because the Cubans didn't know what they had in Christ.
Right.
You know what I mean? So they're trying to like shut her up. She's pissed. She's like blabbing her mouth and they don't know what to do about it. So it's like a whole crazy situation going on here. And so they're trying to keep her in the dark, but give her enough information. But she's strolling into Allen Dulles' office. Yeah, right. Bitch, be cool. She's going into Allen Dulles' office, who was still the director at the time, being like, where the F is my husband? So she knew, but she didn't know the specifics, is what I gleaned from.
Yeah, I doubt they told her that he's in prison in Cuba under Castro.
Right.
You know, that would have sent her over the edge and like demanding they do some shit to get him out of there.
But not only that, it could have blown his cover, and then
well, yeah,
if
then
Castro
he would have killed him.
Yeah, if Castro knew what he had, like he
would have tortured him.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a very interesting situation going on here, and let me share this. So this is a 1965.
Wilma was a Karen. Karen's demanding to know.
Yeah, or she just wasn't happy being at home with 6 kids.
Yeah, well, that's quite possible as well.
Yeah,
they knocked me up 6 times, and this motherfucker won't come home. I'm getting tired of dealing with these kids. I can't get no sleep. Get up in the middle of the night.
Yeah. No,
I got one on one titty and one on the other. I got 2 bottles in the other 2. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, you sound exactly like I envisioned that she would sound. I'm not joking. And this is a quick document. Mr. David L. Christ, his security clearance was approved in 1950 and revalidated 57. And
breaking news, Joe.
Yes.
Read the screen.
Huh. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So they told
Tiny.
Yes, thank you, Deep State Tiny. And by the way, Tiny, my beard is just for you. I haven't shaved in at least 3 weeks. It shows. Like when you're in the mountains, who cares? Right?
He hasn't shaved in 3 days.
Thank you. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I did not know that. And that's exactly why I called you out, Tiny, for asking that question, or when I asked that question, because I knew you would. But no. So these were the CIA agents that were caught bugging the China News Agency.
Yeah, here's the team.
Yep. 3 of them. Daniel Carswell, which was the alias of David Christ, 45, born in 1918, Pennsylvania. Engineer, Eastchester, New York. Rob, my dad used to live in Eastchester, New York, and I lived there
Yeah?
for years. Yeah. It's in the suburbs just north of the city. Thornton Anderson used the name Eustace Danbrunt.
Well, that's a shitty alias.
Yeah. Well, Rob, I'm gonna blow your mind in a second. And Edmund Conrad Turansky, or Walter Sominski used the name Edmund Kuransky, born 1930 Boston. Blah, blah, blah.
That's a bad one too.
Yeah. So, Rob, hold on. I think you know this book here.
I do. I have a copy of it myself, sir.
I Was Castro's Prisoner, and this was, of course, written by Mr. John Martino when he got back from the Cuban prisons, and joined the right-wing / Cuban exile cause. So, Rob, you'd never guess who John Martino mentions in his book in 1963. You get it. Look at the left here. Dan Carswell, Eustace Danbert, Edmund Turansky. So here we have Martino in 1963 giving the aliases of the three guys that were caught in the bugging of the Chinese embassy in Cuba, including Carswell, aka Christ, in his book. And of course, Rob, we some of us might know he also mentioned David Morales by name in this book. You cannot make that up. I'm like, not his alias, David Morales' name. It's not in the same portion here. But this is crazy. So essentially, they are all in the Tresconia prison complex, which is like the immigration complex where they kind of kept all the mafiosos, Sandro Trafficante, Lauren Hall, Bernardo de Torres, a bunch of other mafiosos were kept in Tresconia prison. And at some point, David Christ and his two accomplices, Danbrunt, Turansky, the aliases names were transferred to the Isle of Pines prison. So the Isle of Pines prison, Rob, is like the maximum security prison. Like if you really screwed up, that's where you're sent.
Yeah. That's the one you ain't getting off of.
Yeah. So if you're in Tresconia, you're with the mafiosos. It's kind of like a Goodfellas type of, like, you remember them making the dinner, this and that, right?
Yeah,
and
you get wine with you, yeah.
Yeah. And Santo
dinners.
Yeah. And Santo Trafficante actually had his food delivered from the hotel casino he owned every day. So literally was a scene out of Goodfellas. And so at the bottom and left-hand side of the page, Martino writes, Dan Carswell, a.k.a. David Christ, and the other Americans came into our galera to say goodbye. They were visually shaken, but they kept their self-control. They gave me their wrist watches, their portable radios, and some other personal belongings, such as rings and other things of value. On the Isle of Pines, you are not permitted any personal possessions, and if you go there with them, they are taken from you.
Here, take this shit. So when we get to the Isle of Pines, they don't open up my watch and see that it's really a communications device and this and that. The radio is a bugging device, and they won't find the microphones and that. Yeah, okay, I got you.
It's nuts, and this is in Martino's book. So he quotes one of the guys working under Chris, Danbert. I can't understand this. I was told we were not going to be moved. They said we were going to keep us here for a while, and then they would set us free. Martino writes, the three guys, Chris and his two accomplices, met their fate with courage, like real soldiers. We shook hands. In Cuba, people get into the habit of hugging each other, and everyone there gave him an abrazo, which I guess is a hug. So not only, Rob, do you have Martino referencing Christ in his 1963 book and his two accomplices by name, you also have him saying, hey, I'm going to the Isle of Pines. Here's all my stuff, including my wristwatch, which is like in the 60s. Like,
I'm sure that was full of spy gadgets, bro.
Yourself, well, yeah, but it's like your cell phone almost, right? Like, it's like you're like, I can't take the cell phone there. So, like, here's my last possessions.
Yeah, here's my rings. There's my jewelry, my watch, my secret spy pen, my radio. You know, all the nice shit they got to keep when they were in Frisconia. But when they get moved to the Rikers Island of Cuba,
yeah,
you don't get to take that stuff with you.
No. And hold on. Let me see here. Okay. When former prisoner of Castro Mafia organized crime member John Martino returned to the United States in 1962, he was released a little less than a year before Christ. Chris stayed in there until like April 63, with Martino being released in 1962. He spoke and wrote about his friendship with fellow prisoner in Cuba, Daniel Lester Carswell. Of course, he's using his alias. And I Was Castro's Prisoner, which I just showed you, recalls his first conversation with Carswell. Carswell told me, Christ, we had drilled through the floor with the ceiling of the Chinese news agency. We were about to lower a microphone into the next room so that we could put everything that was said there on tape. So, you know, Martino is a fellow electronics expert. He was rigging slot machines for the casino, I think Dobell, which was owned by Sandro Trafficante. He is talking shop, electronics shop, with David Christ, aka Daniel Carswell.
And I'm sure he told him who he was doing it for as well.
For sure. And it seems like the CIA was interested in questioning Martino when he got back because they were worried. What is he saying? Did he break? You know what I mean? Like, did he give anything up to the Cubans? There's a lot of information that Christ has that the CIA is trying to protect. And it's crazy. And me and Doug are going to expand on this in our Lancer presentation. I just wanted to give you a little tease. But last thing, Rob.
Hang on, Joe.
You yap worse than 6 bobbers. You yap worse than 6 bobbers.
I do. But guess who in 1994 stated that Christ was involved around Interpen?
Hemming.
Yes, yes, sir. Mr. Gerald Patrick Hemming. And Hemming was asked how Christ reacted when his identity was revealed. It could be he felt I was in charge and I knew what I was doing. Howard K. Davis was sent a photograph of Christ, then was asked, did you ever see Christ around Interpen? Yeah, I saw him around, and I knew him well. You saw Christ? Yes, I did. I believe I did, if I can remember. I saw him over there a couple of times. People would wander on in and out all the time, even CIA people. That was no big secret. Fiorini, aka Frank Sturgis, had a relationship with the company. That is absolute. We knew it at the time. It was no secret in Miami. So,
Obvi.
To wrap this up, you have this guy, Christ, who was knowledgeable about every CIA wiretapping and electronics operation, literally created the technical service division of the CIA. In jail, Martino knows him in 1963. I don't put a lot into what Hemming says, of course, but if he was around Interpen, you'd have to think it was because of a relationship with Martino.
No, Hall.
Or Hall as well. Also, a member of Tresconia prison detainees. So that is all I have, sir, and I'm just gonna check in on some comments right now. Martino yapped worse than 6 barbers, as you were saying.
All right. Next up, let's go back to New Orleans. Thank you, Joe, for that incredibly enlightening Christification.
You're welcome, sir.
I've got a document about George Higginbotham. George Higginbotham.
Who?
George Higginbotham.
Enlighten.
Never heard of him?
Enlighten me in the audience of who this is.
Info was provided by Garrison investigator Barbara Reed, April 1968. George Higginbotham was a former investigator for Guy Banister in 1661, and he only had social contact with Banister in 62 and 63, allegedly.
1661? 1961?
Yeah, he was an investigator for Guy Banister.
Okay, you said 1661.
I said 60 and 61.
Oh, I see. Thank you, sir.
Yes. At present, Higginbotham has been arraigned on a charge of marijuana possession.
We can respect that.
And his attorney is
I have no idea. Mark Lane?
Who was everybody's attorney?
Mark Lane?
In New Orleans.
Dean Andrews?
No.
G. Regillo.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Third time's a charm.
G. Ray Gill Jr.
Got it.
Senior. Junior. Also a lawyer. But also G. Ray Gill. The first night he was here, he showed me copies of 3 letters from Banister to him concerning Banister's providing him with false credentials and a cover for infiltrating communist groups. His code name was Dale.
Dale?
Dale.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Dale. I'm really interested in joining your group. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Dale Higginbotham. So, Barbara Reed saw letters written from Banister to Higginbotham concerning false credentials and a cover for infiltrating communist groups. Joe, what's that sound like?
Training communist groups?
False credentials and infiltrating communist groups.
Lee Harvey Oswald.
His code name was to be Dale or AJ. Ident.
Alec Heidel.
Yeah. So this guy was doing the same thing on instructions from Guy Banister as Oswald was doing. Using a fake name and trying to infiltrate communist groups.
Okay.
Interesting. Higginbotham says he saw Martin McAuliffe in Banister's office a few times. His reason for severing ties with Banister he attributes to a definite nervousness upon seeing crates of obvious military supplies in the back room, i.e. guns and grenades and shit like that.
Yeah, ammunition.
There were apparently meetings also held there. For some time, he said that Banister and Kent Courtney worked closely. So the first time that names come up, Kent Courtney.
Yeah, last week, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
However, Banister did not have a good opinion of Courtney, considering him too mercenary and a bit of a loose mouth, loose lips, because they sink ships, Joe. Higginbotham also says there was quite a bit of radio equipment in the back room as well. Some guy named Lou Davis, who was a Minuteman associated with A. Roswell Thompson, hello, Thomas Beckham, who appeared with Thomas Beckham at his 1963 grand jury appearance. This guy, Lou Davis, who we're talking about here, was at Banister's frequently. He was also friends with George Lincoln Rockwell and was also at Banister's office with him, the leader of the Un-American Party. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Stayed at Mike Slatter's apartment on Royal Street before they were removed to Plaquemines Mines Parish. A young man named Eddie Porter, who is now on the West Coast, told George he knew Oswald was a hustler on Royal Street.
What is that?
If you remember that famous episode that I did, Joe, called I F'd Lee Harvey Oswald, and that story, of how Oswald and this guy met in like Lafayette Park and went back to his apartment for $10. They did the dirty. Yeah. So here's some corroboration. George said Porter did not specify the time, or if he did, George doesn't remember, but Porter is gay. Higginbotham was kidding Banister about sharing a building with people passing out leaflets on the street. And Banister said, "Cool it. One of them is one of mine." Quote. Higginbotham suggested following up the possibility of a connection between Richard Lockley and Banister. He said, rumor has it that the FBI arrested Lockley in the Covington area for selling arms to Latin America. But Higginbotham considered it odd that Lockley was never out of business, and business seemed to even improve for him. Probably a snitch. He had a publication called the Counterinsurgency Council, CIC, and was friends with Robert K. Brown. Screw that guy. It was all literature concerning demolition procedures, guerrilla warfare, army manuals of warfare, textbooks, and instructions of how to organize a fighting group. Much of what George said was difficult to orientate. He would say, quote, "You might check this out," or "Here's a name." And when I asked what he'd say, he'd say, "I'd rather not say." And then he kept throwing in, quote, "This may have no meaning, but," or "I'm not sure I have anything that might help," until I was never sure whether this was meant to be bait or not. A lot of things he said he would prefer to discuss in detail only with the Jolly Green Giant himself, Jim Garrison. So interesting, George Higginbotham, former investigator. So next up, let's take a look at this here. I came across this, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know Jack Martin wrote a letter to J. Edgar Hoover personally?
I don't think I did.
Okay. Well, here we go. And this is to Mr. Sullivan, one of J. Edgar Hoover's direct assistants. Okay. Subject, Jack S. Martin, New Orleans, Louisiana. Request to speak with the director personally. At 6 p.m., 2/25/1971, Joe. 71. An individual identifying himself to be Jack S. Martin, blah, 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 Royal Street, New Orleans, telephonically asked to speak with the director. He subsequently asked to speak with assistants to the director, Sullivan, and Moore, and was referred to Extra Duty Supervisor E.N. Best, Special Investigative Division. Martin claimed to be a reporter with the, quote, New Orleans Post-Journal, Joe. And apparently this New Orleans Post-Journal in 1971 was located where, Joe?
The Balter building? Or I don't know.
531 Lafayette Street.
It is highlighted, yes.
Yeah. And you know what that happens to be, Joe?
Yes, Guy Banister's office.
Yeah.
The other side of it, right?
Yeah. So what in the Sam Hill in 1971, Martin is working for a paper called the New Orleans Post-Journal housed in Banister's old office. How ironic is that?
Yeah, and Banister is dead in 64, so you're talking like 7-ish years after.
Yeah, it's just
that's really interesting.
It's a high coincidence.
Yeah.
He advised that he was calling concerning, quote, snooping. He advised he'd been told by a trusted associate that he and his office were under surveillance by the FBI. Imagine that. He said, I guess I'm a bit of a nut, but I'm on your side. And if you want to speak to me, just come knock on the mother door. Okay? He says, I see you. I know you're there. If you want to talk to me, hey, come knock on the door, bro. Bureau and New Orleans files characterized Martin as being of questionable mental stability. And here we go, folks. And it is noted that he was formerly confined to a psychiatric ward. Now, at that point, it had been not over, but close to 15 years since he'd been put in a mental institution. I believe 12 years prior. The New Orleans office advised that Martin is a self-styled private investigator known at the New Orleans office to be a psychopathic personality. New Orleans also advised that he was recently the subject of an impersonation investigation. What? Joe? I'm guessing this would have to do with Joseph J. Martin of the CIA.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But there is currently no active investigation concerning him. Interesting.
Very.
So then I came across this. This is a lawsuit, Joe. A civil class action lawsuit. From John F. English, Jack S. Martin, doing business as Tri-States News Service versus Jim Garrison, Elliot Richardson, and James Eastland. Petition to show cause class action. Why order should hot issue or not issue? I can't tell. To the honorable judges of the United States District Courts, now into the honorable court, come your petitioners, John F. English and J.S. Jack Martin, who respectfully by and according to these attached memorandums and enclosed evidence in proof, do err as follows, to wit, that on or about the 17th or 18th of August 1973, your plaintiffs did notify both the defendants. Oh, I'm slipping into an Indian accent there. Sorry.
Yeah.
What happened there? Jack Martin just went to India. I get carried away with all this proper English that they're trying. Obviously, Jack Martin wrote this, right? And this lawsuit goes on and on and on. And I really never understood exactly what in the Sam Hill they're suing Jim Garrison for, especially as part of a class action lawsuit.
Defamation? Right? Defamation is the only thing I could think of.
No, it wasn't defamation or defecation. No. But anyway, it goes through. And that the Honorable Court read, thoroughly digest the appended memorandum and evidence of proof, examine its witness and other individuals necessarily relative thereto, and that this shall be all said and done, set a closed hearing trial date if feasible or needed to hear additional testimony, that upon such review or hearing, the Honorable Court so direct by order, full-scale grand jury investigation, federal, state of these matters, and perhaps charge some of these culprits immediately by directed verdict, bench warrant. Respectfully submitted, John F. English, petitioner, J.S. Jack Martin, petitioner, and notarized. So I did a little digging, Joe.
Okay.
I went deep down this rabbit hole, son. So, this is interesting. This is from, I believe, the FBI, Airtel, December 28, 73. So now we're almost to 1974. Okay.
Okay.
The year of my birth. Enclosed for the Bureau are 4 copies of a LHM captioned as above, and this is concerning Gerald Gallinghouse, United States Attorney, Eastern District of Louisiana, J.S. Jack Martin, Complainant, Administrative Inquiry, C.C. New Orleans. This is to the Director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. So, enclosed for the Bureau are 4 copies of the LHM captioned as above. No copy is being furnished to the USA at New Orleans. In view of the contents as set forth in the enclosed LHM, New Orleans feels that further investigation is not warranted, and therefore this matter is being placed in a closed status. But reference is made to a memorandum dated November 23rd, 73 from Robert Bork, Acting Attorney General, to the Director, FBI, captioned Letter of Jack S. Martin, New Orleans, Louisiana, blah, blah, blah. On December 3rd, J.S. Martin was contacted at his residence, at which time he provided the following information. He related that in the past he has been a private investigator, but currently considers himself to be a writer and periodically submits articles to various newspapers in Texas and Mississippi, for which he receives a whopping $25 per article that he writes. Mr. Martin advised that approximately 2 years ago, he had a conversation with a person by the name of John English of New Orleans. Martin described English as a, quote, promoter, who is currently in the bail bonding business. At the time of this conversation, about 2 years ago, English told Martin that the information he was to tell Martin was furnished to him by G. Ray Gill, Jr., a New Orleans attorney. Okay. This document contains neither recommendations nor conclusions of the FBI. It is the property of the FBI and is loaned to your agency, and its contents are not to be distributed outside your agency. So these are FBI documents that they gave to the CIA for some reason. So this guy, John English, went on to state that prior to Gerald Gallinghouse becoming the United States Attorney in New Orleans, Louisiana, Gallinghouse had been president of the New Orleans Levee Board. At the same time, Gallinghouse was also an attorney for the Pittman Construction Company of New Orleans, and that Gallinghouse had been instrumental in a $30,000 payoff to a local judge, which resulted in a court settlement in favor of the Pittman Construction Company, for which Gallinghouse was the attorney. English told Martin that the favorable court decision in favor of Pittman had been rendered by David Gertler. English further told Martin that according to Gill had seen this payoff of $30,000 from Gallinghouse to Judge Gertler. English further told Martin that he had recorded on 2 separate occasions conversations with Gill regarding the aforementioned matter, which would substantiate what Gill had said in regards to Gallinghouse. Martin related that either the same day or a few days later he was at the office of John English, at which time Martin talked with Gill on the phone, which conversation was recorded by English. On this occasion, Gill reiterated and substantially the same information in regards to the $30,000 payoff by Gallinghouse that he witnessed. Martin related that he personally does not have any of these tape recordings. Of course he doesn't. Why would he? And that these recordings were maintained by English. Martin stated that his understanding that these tape recordings were subsequently stolen from English, and as a result, English no longer has them. Of course he doesn't. Martin stated that the reason he has waited for 2 years to bring the above information to the proper authorities is that he is a writer and felt that there might be a, quote, story in regards to the information furnished by English. He stated, however, that because of the Watergate affair, which has brought out corruption against high government officials, he felt it was his duty now to bring this information to the attention of the proper authorities. So, basically, Jack Martin and via John English, reluctantly, I guess, English told Martin a story in which he witnessed some dirty dealings, right? But they have no proof. But of course, Martin makes it a big deal about everything, puts together a class action lawsuit, is contacting the FBI, demanding to talk to Hoover, all about this shit that doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, let's see, September 27th, 73, United States District Court, Eastern District of Louisiana, John F. English, Jack S. Martin, Tri-State News Service versus Jim Garrison, Elliot Richardson, James Eastland. Judgment. The court, having on September 26, 1973, granted the motion of the plaintiffs John T. English and Jack S. Martin to dismiss. It is ordered, adjudged, and decreed that there be judgment in favor of the defendants Jim Garrison, Elliot Richardson, and James Eastland, and against the plaintiffs John English and Jack Martin, dismissing the plaintiff's suit with costs. New Orleans, Louisiana, this 27th day of September 1973. So basically, the court threw out their case and charged the costs of everything to Jack Martin and John English for whatever reason.
Right. Attorney, court costs, etc.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting. The only thing really interesting that came out of this court case at all is that Jack Martin gave a very interesting 40-some page deposition. He was actually got deposed, right? Wow. So it's very interesting because they go into all kinds of stuff, and I'm gonna post this over at Locals later, maybe tomorrow. So if you're interested, you can read it. It's way too much to read here, but there is some things that kind of get thrown in here, and very interesting stuff. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about here, Joe, real quick. I know we're in OT here, but
yeah, all good.
I came across a document, and damn it, the reason I've been reading a bunch of shit off the screen tonight is because, folks, I left my print off documents at work today. I did not bring them home, but fortunately, I had, for some reason, I don't normally do it, but I uploaded a bunch of them in here a couple days ago. But I was missing one that I really needed, and I will bring it to the next show. But it was interesting enough to share with you now. I came across a document, and it was an FBI document, and it was a conversation transcript basically between it wasn't a conversation. It was a letter from a very prominent news reporter directly to J. Edgar Hoover. Now, this is somebody that he obviously had a personal relationship with. And I don't mean sexual. I mean, this guy was a professional, really well-known newsman. Okay. And he is snitching. This guy is snitching straight to Hoover. So, and I can't. I think it was about the Garrison investigation. I'm pretty sure that that's what it was about. What was going on in New Orleans? But he was telling Hoover everything. So I'm like, who is this dude? Never heard of the name before. And when I Googled it, I was like, holy shit. Okay. So the snitch letter to Hoover was from a guy named Maryman Smith.
What was his name? His first name?
Merriman.
Maryman.
Well, his first name is Albert, but he went by Merriman. Okay. So this guy was an American wire service reporter, notably serving as White House correspondent for the UPI and its predecessor, United Press. He won a Pulitzer Prize, Joe, in '64 for his coverage of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in '69 by Johnson. A little bit about this guy. He said he's known by his middle name and his nickname Smitty, Merriman or Smitty. Smith covered U.S. presidents from Franklin Delano Roosevelt to Richard Nixon, and originated the practice of closing presidential news conferences with "Thank you, Mr. President," which was the title of his 1946 book, written during his coverage of the Harry Truman administration. That honor, accorded to the senior wire service reporter present at presidential news conferences, became more popularly known when it was continued by Smith's UPI colleague, the ever elderly Helen Thomas. So let's see. On November the 26th, Joe, or November 22nd, 1963, Smith was a UPI reporter in Dallas for John F. Kennedy's visit. He traveled in the motorcade, Joe, in the White House pool car, which had a radio telephone installed in it. When the shots were fired, Smith grabbed the phone, called the UPI office. He stayed on the phone while Jack Bell, the AP reporter in the car, started beating the shit out of Smith and yelling at him to hand over the goddamn phone. At 12:34 p.m., 4 minutes after the presidential shooting, the report went out over UPI wire. And in 1964, he received the Pulitzer Prize for his brave coverage of the assassination of U.S. President John F. Kennedy. He was the first person to publicly use the term, Joe, grassy knoll.
Really?
Regarding the assassination.
Hey, that's worth Pulitzer right there.
Yeah. So it's getting the shit beat out of you. In the 1960s, Smith was a frequent guest on television shows hosted by Jack Parr and Merv Griffin. Smith was presented with the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Lyndon Johnson in 1969. He died in 1970, despondent over the death of his son in the Vietnam War and perhaps suffering from PTSD, I'm sure, as a result of witnessing the Kennedy assassination 7 years earlier. Smith died at his home in Alexandria, Virginia, from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Although he never served in the military himself, his grave is in Section 32 of Arlington National Cemetery, next to his son's by special permission, Joe, of the commanding general of the Military District of Washington for his service to the country. At the end of the president's press conference on May 8, 1970, concentrating on the Kent State shootings and his decision to expand the war into Cambodia, Nixon called on the White House press corps to stand in Smith's remembrance. In 1970, the White House Correspondence Association, Joe, established the Maryman Smith Memorial Award for excellence in presidential news coverage under deadline pressure. His name was removed from the award, however, in 2022 because his ass got canceled. Why did he get canceled?
And what did he do?
Well, I'll tell you. Apparently, he wasn't a big fan of black or female journalists and tried to keep them from getting memberships or having memberships in the National Press Club and tried to prevent them from attending the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Yeah.
So good job, Maryman Smith. And I promise next week I'll have the document that I can't do justice at this very moment, but I thought it was interesting. I've never heard of the dude. Turns out he was a snitch for the FBI, for Hoover. But he was also in the motorcade and coined the term grassy knoll. So
wow.
There you have it.
They took his name off the award for decades because of some recent kind of.
It was only award for 52 years until in 2022 they decided to take it off because he didn't like black people or women being reporters.
Interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, I guess it's about that time, Joe, for Dean Andrews to waddle on in.
Yeah. Yeah.
As we say goodbye.
Yeah.
To everybody. Thanks for hanging with us tonight. It's been a glorious 2+ hours with you.
Yes. And thank you, everyone. Rob, we are almost at 1,800 subscribers, and there is a percentage of people who watch the show that are not subscribed. So we will, when we talk about the subject, it's not necessarily pushed in the algo. So if you like the show, if you subscribe, comment, it really helps. We appreciate it. We love every single one of you. Literally, we do. And next week, Rob, hopefully we'll be celebrating 1,800.
That's right. That's right. We've been teetering on the brink for a little while, but yeah. We'll get there. We'll get there, Joe. Eventually.
It's a grind. It's a grind. Yeah.
We're like the tortoise. We'll get there eventually. Slow and steady is the pace, my friend.
Yes, sir.
All right, Dino. When the Saints come marching in, Joe, it's time for us to close the show. So without further ado,
I'm gonna get Ruby to dance with me. Once you put Dean up.
Here we go. Dino.
In parish prison. He dare not talk for the record, but he said, "Come to Bourbon Street and I'll show you what I think of the case." The greatest lies are told in the name of truth. The greatest crimes are committed in the name of justice. The quotation is Jim Garrison's. It could be used for him or against him in this strange case. Good night.
Bye, Ruby.
Hi.
Poochie.